If you want a Hanukkah that's deeper than just dreidels, potato pancakes, and jelly donuts, then this is the class for you. We're not going to talk too much about the actual halachot and things like that. We'll actually have something planned for next week regarding that, but just a little bit maybe about the history and perhaps a better understanding of what it is that the Greeks were trying to do. What did they try to accomplish? Who were the Greeks, and who did we fight when we fought them? There's a lot of misunderstandings about that. We'll have to talk about the history and hopefully some of the mysticism as well. There's Hanukkah is a very deep holiday, very holy holiday, and hence the word holy in the word holiday. So let's see what we can see from the classic sources. So first of all, just so you know, uh, a lot of people find hints to Hanukkah in the Torah, and that should not be a surprise to us because we've Baruch Hashem when we were learning the Parsha of Ha'azinu, we read the famous Ramban that said the entire history of the world is in the Torah. And the Ramban, by the way, is one of the people who finds hints to Hanukkah in the Torah. But aside from all that, Midrash itself, Midrash, the classic oral tradition of the Jewish people, finds a very important hint to Hanukkah in not the end of the Torah, in the very, very beginning of the Torah, in the second pasuk of the Torah. So let's get right into it with that, and then let's see what happens from there. Let me share my screen, hopefully successfully. Let's be successful me right now. It's good to see everybody here. It's so much better to see everybody in person, but at least I get to see everybody somehow. All right, so Baruch Hashem. All right, so here we are. Let's view the library. So this is Insights for a Deeper Hanukkah is the name of the class. And we're going to start with the second pasuk in the Torah. Like as promised, we're not doing anything right now. We can do that later. I gave in the office. All right. So in the Torah, second pasuk says, "Va'aretz hayta tohu vavohu, v'choshek al pnei tahom, v'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamoyim." So the land was tohu vavohu, was unformed, was empty, and there was darkness on the surface of the Tehom. Let's call that let's use the Sephardic translation says the surface of the deep. The Ruach Elokim, the Spirit of God. Here it says the wind of God. Merachefet al pnei hamayim, moved over the water. So the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, Bet Daled, if you want to look at it yourself, quotes Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, otherwise known as Reish Lakish, the famous former gangster highwayman who became religious and became a scholar of quite some note. So he says that all of these different descriptions of what the earth was like are all hints to, in other words, the earth was becoming prepared for the four galiot, the four times that the Jewish people would be in a state of galut, of usually translated as exile. Although, as we'll see very, very shortly, one of these exiles was hardly an exile, as we'll see, and not in its usual translation. So it says Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Pata Kriya Galiot. It's really these four descriptions of what the earth was like, unformed and void and dark, and the wind of Hashem sweeping over the water. All of them are different. These four things are actually four different times that the Jewish people would be in exile. And again, as I said before, the way it's explained is that, in other words, the earth knew, obviously, God knew that there would be a time of galut when the Jewish people would be exiled, and He was preparing the earth for that terrible existence. We are currently in galut. We are in exile now. We call it the Roman exile, which there's a matter of controversy. But let's leave it at let's call it the Roman exile for lack of a better name. And it has lasted for 2,000 years. from the time that the Romans destroyed the Second Temple. Previous to that, there were three other exiles, making a total of four. The book of Daniel talks quite a bit about these four different animals, these four different groups that would conquer the Jewish people, four different nations. And the first was Babylonia, when Bavel destroyed the first temple and took us out of our land and brought us into their land. And we were in the Babylonian exile until the Persians conquered them. And then we were in the Persian exile for a rather short time. And then we were, that's when the Purim story happened. And then we went back to our land, rebuilt the temple, or built the second temple, is a better way to say it. And during the second temple, again, the Jewish people did not behave and were punished with two other exiles, one being the Greek exile, which, as we'll see in a moment, was unique in a number of ways. But also then after we defeated the Greeks, quite a bit later, not so long later, about 100 years later, the Roman Empire came in and sacked Jerusalem, kicked the Jews out of the land, and that was the beginning of the state that we are currently in. All right, so those are the four exiles. So which exile is which? So the Midrash goes into it and says, this is this exile, this is the other exile. It says, Choshech, darkness, which is one of the states of the world at the time. Ze galut Yavan. I have it in bold here. Choshech ze galut Yavan. So darkness is in fact the exile of Greece. Yavan is Greece. Interesting, by the way, Rabbi Foyer in Yeshiva pointed out to me, that Yavan is spelled interestingly. It's Yud, Vav, Nun, which are, if you think about it, really different lengths of the same letter, right? A Yud and then a Vav is like a longer Yud, and then a Nun Sofit is like a longer Vav, which is a longer Yud. So there you have those three letters, Yavan. It actually looks like it's what do you call it? Diagonal line downwards, and he saw symbolism in that, in the fact that the way Greece thought of things and their philosophy, which was an important part of the story, what we're going to get to in a moment. Anyway, so why is Choshech, of all things, why is Choshech Greece? By the way, if you think of Greece in the American understanding of it, in the Gentile understanding of it, of the Western civilization understanding of it, think of Greece as the home of Aristotle. Think of Greece as the home of Euclid, of arithmetic, of science, of philosophy, of literature, of art, of the Ionic, the Doric, the Corinthian columns, the Archimedes, mechanics and astronomy and geography, basically all of the almost all of the studies, almost all of the sciences come from Greece. So in the Western mind, Greece has really nothing to be ashamed of. Greece is quite amazing. There's been quite a lot of accomplishments, and aside from that, quite a lot of contribution to the world. So Greece is Choshech. Greece is darkness. Greece is the opposite, seems like, right? You would think that Greece is enlightenment. So says the Midrash, why is Yavan Choshech? Shehecheshicha einehem shel Yisrael bigzerotehem, because they darkened the eyes of the Jews of Israel with their gzerot, with their laws. We'll talk about that in a moment. It's going to be an example here, but there are other laws as well. What's one of the laws? Shahaita umeret lahen. They said to them, Kitvu al keren hashor she'ein lachem chelek be'elokei Yisrael. You must write. The Jews were forced to write on the horns of oxen that they had no portion in the God of Israel. Again, the rule was Greece enforced that they had to write on the horns of oxen that the Jews have no portion in the God of Israel. All right, so that's what the Midrash says. So it seems very clear from the Midrash that Greece is bad, Greece bad, Israel good, and they and the worst thing they did was they created this darkness. Now, one of the things that becomes very clear, this is what I've been hinting to so far all along, is that Greece is a unique exile. Greece did not kick the Jews out of their land. The Jews were in their land and were still in exile. In other words, they were in some sort of, call it spiritual exile, call it academic exile, maybe it was a power thing, political exile, but certainly they were in their own land. They were not exiled, they were not kicked out, as exile usually means, as they were in the other exiles. At the end of the Persian exile, they were already back, but certainly certainly they had rules as well. So what are some of the other laws? And these are kind of famous. Actually, let's see if you guys can volunteer any. Remember any of the laws you've learned that the Greeks did not allow the Jews to do?
Bris, Shabbos.
Okay, so Brit Milah, Shabbat, and
Rosh Chodesh.
Very good, Rosh Chodesh. Look at that, the Goodwin team tag team right there. So, very nice. Yes, so Rosh Chodesh, Brit Milah, and Shabbat. Now, those three laws were forbidden, and they had this additional positive commandment where they had to write on the horns of their oxen. Those are the four major gzerot of the Greeks. That wasn't all they did. They also made breeches, and when I say breeches, I don't mean pants. So it says in the Mishnah in Midot, which has nothing to do with characteristics. It has to do with the size of things in the Beit Hamikdash, God willing, when it gets rebuilt. Lifni Mimenu, he writes there that there was a place called Soreg, and Gavoa Asara Tfachim. It was taller than 10 Tfachim. We're going to return back to that number, God willing, soon. And then it says, and I have this in bold here, there were 13 breaks in that wall, that 10 tefach tall wall. That's a mouthful right there. There are 13 breaks in the wall. We call those breaches. Sheparsum Malche Yavan, the kings of Yavan, the Greek kings, broke holes through this temple wall 13 times. So what's going on? I mean, of all things, we have a lot of laws. We have kosher, we have Shemitah, we have shatnez. There's a law that you have to build a fence around your roof if there's a chance people are going to climb up there. The Greeks didn't outlaw any of that. They had no problem with Shemitah. They had a problem with this wall in the Soreg. Okay, they had a problem with Shabbat and Brit Milah and Rosh Chodesh. They had a problem with our oxen having clean horns, right? And by the way, we mentioned this in the song in Ma'us Tzur. We mentioned that they broke holes in this wall. By the way, if you notice, the song that we sing of Ma'us Tzur that they traditionally sing during the Chanuka lighting, you'll notice that there are very few mentions of Hanukkah in that song. If you look at a translation, really, that song goes through most of Jewish history, and Jewish holidays, and it talks about even Purim and Esther, Mordechai, and all of a sudden, then when it talks about the actual holiday of Hanukkah, what does it say? It says Partzu Chomot Migdalai. Right? They made holes in my palace. In the Beit Hamikdash, the Greeks made holes in it. So these holes in this wall seem to be pretty important and mentioned even in the Mishnah, which seems to bend over backwards not to mention Hanukkah, which we're something we're learning about in the evenings of Shabbat before Mariv. So one of the things we're learning. But to make a long story short, it looks like there's some message the Greeks are trying to get across. There's some sort of theme that's common in all of these things. And so we need to investigate. So let's look at Rosh Chodesh. What is Rosh Chodesh? So the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, we'll just start with that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not talking about Rosh Chodesh specifically, but I think you get the point. It says, Arba Rashi Shanim Heim. There are 4 Rosh Hashanahs. Now don't get nervous. You don't have to keep Rosh Hashanah the same way all 4 times. So Be'echad Ben Nisan, the first day of Nisan, is a Rosh Hashanah the Malachim Uragalim. So it's a Rosh Hashanah in terms of like how you count the year. In this year, they used to count the year by the reign of the king. Right? You might have heard that in movies or books, right? So they'd say this is the 2nd year in the reign of King so and so. So when does that year begin? That year begins on the 1st of Nisan. And Regalim, in other words, the holidays. In other words, when you start having to, when you, for example, if you made a shvua, made a promise that you do certain things before the next cycle of holidays. The holidays begin at Nisan. In other words, begin with Pesach. Rosh Hashanah l'maser behema. So you have to give 1/10 of your animal produce to charity, to as tithe. So when do you start counting your animals? You start counting your animals on the 1st of Elul, which is a month before what we call Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim be'achad b'Tishrei. They say no, you start in the beginning of Tishrei. What the halacha is, it's not relevant right now. Be'achad b'Tishrei Rosh Hashanah l'shanim. We know Rosh Hashanah is on the 1st of Tishrei. Ulashmitin, Yovlin. So the counting of Shemitah, the 7th sabbatical year. When does that begin? That begins also on the 1st of Tishrei. Yovel, the once every 49 years. That also begins in that time of the year. Natia B'liraka. So also for vegetable, counting when vegetables begin growing. Shvat, but the 1st of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilam, is the Rosh Hashanah for the tree. We'll learn more about that when Tu B'Shvat occurs. God willing, there will be a Tu B'Shvat this year. These are Divrei Beit Shammai. Beis Hillel argues and says, no, b'chamisha asar bo, on Tu B'Shvat, on the 15th of Shvat. Why do I bring this up? I bring this up because, as you can see, we have a different date for different things. So the year, by the way, for the kings means for the Gentile kings. So Gentile kings are counted somehow differently than Jewish kings. And what is Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is our calendar. Rosh Chodesh then is also our calendar. Rosh Chodesh, we count, we decide when Rosh Chodesh is. In other words, the Bet Din used to establish that today is Rosh Chodesh. It's the first day of the month, and it's our month. And our holidays go according to our months, which are decided by our sages. It has nothing to do with the Gentile calendar. It has nothing to do with 2020. It has nothing to do with December or anything else. Although, truth be told, we also use the solar calendar, as was mentioned this morning when we mentioned the halacha. This week, Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, we start saying V'tein tal umata levracha in our Shemona Esrei. We start saying it when? On December 5th outside of Eretz Israel. Why December 5th? So it's a long discussion, not for now. But we do use, the important thing is we do indeed use the solar calendar, and the solstices are relevant to us as well. But the Rosh Chodesh, that goes by the lunar calendar. The lunar calendar is uniquely Jewish, right? It's uniquely Jewish, and so is Brit Milah. Brit Milah would, if it's done for health reasons, is one thing, but if Brit Milah is done the way that we have done traditionally, there's extra parts to it that don't have to do with health or anything or really anything else besides the fact that God commanded it. God told Abraham that he and his descendants, in order to do what Hashem wants, they have to go through this process. The males have to go through this process of Brit Milah. And what's Shabbat? Shabbat is the ultimate example of something that's uniquely Jewish. A Gentile who keeps Shabbat is not doing the right thing. A Gentile is, and somebody, by the way, as many of us know, somebody who's going through conversion has to break Shabbat at least once on Shabbat. It's a specifically, uniquely Jewish activity, keeping Shabbat. It's our relationship with Hashem. So Parzu Chomot Migdalai, what the Greeks were intending to do was to break that relationship, was to break that unique relationship between Hashem and the Jews. In other words, they were saying, just like very Aristotelian, they would point out, you aren't mathematically different, you don't look different, so you aren't logically different. According to Greek logic, according to anything outside of Jewish philosophy and outside of Jewish spirituality, there is no difference between us and everyone else. We are human, they are human, we have ability to be great, they have an ability to be great. So what makes the Jew stand out? Oh, and it's very interesting, by the way. I'm a member of different interesting groups on Facebook, and one of them is an education group, and one person has a whole series of classes that they're teaching on Chanuka about how important it is to be nonviolent and how important it is to be understanding of other cultures, etc., etc. Almost the exact opposite of what the Hashmonaim were saying. So this is it's a valid point, and there's definitely some truth in it. I'm not gonna argue that, but it's important to remember that Hanukkah specifically is a holiday about standing up for our religion, giving up our lives if necessary, to show that it's that important. And when it comes down to it, it requires violence, perhaps sometimes. I'm not saying we should ever go out and be violent. I'm a lover, not a fighter, but it's important to remember that there are things that you have to stand up for. You have to protest when something is wrong. Non-violence is not always the solution. I read in a book recently that if Gandhi would have tried his non-violence approach almost anywhere else, he'd have just been shot. They wouldn't take it. The reason it worked in India, the reason so much was accomplished by Gandhi not wanting to fight and with his protests and his fasting and all of that, the reason it worked was because when it comes down to it, the British were decent people in general, and they as a nation they were offended by the cruelty that they were showing, and eventually they stopped. That would not have happened in Nazi Germany, right? That would not happen in tribal parts of Africa nowadays, or the civil wars that are happening there. Nonviolence just wouldn't work there. You can try to be nonviolent, but nonviolence only works if you're dealing with decent people. Okay, but aside from that, were the Greeks decent people? I don't know. There isn't very much about morality in some of the things that they did, but their whole goal, in other words, is to make us equal to them, make themselves equal to us, and that's what Hanukkah is about. Hanukkah is about not our superiority, because we're not superior, God forbid, but it's about our relationship with Hashem, our unique relationship with Hashem, which is something we need to hold on to, and something that we need to emphasize in our lives. Now, we emphasize it a lot in Hanukkah, and that's pretty much it. And in those 8 days, we celebrate that concept, and then for the rest of the year, we sort of have to. So we have to kind of like rely on the smoke of that fire. We rely on the afterburn. We still feel that way, but not as enthusiastically. And it's really supposed to this holiday, Hanukkah, is supposed to be so powerful. It's supposed to get us through the dark of winter, of the possible depression that so many people go through because of the seasonal changes, et cetera, et cetera. But also, that's not a coincidence that's what this is the time of the year when we have Hanukkah, when we fought off the Greek advances. So again, the Greeks were saying, uh, be normal, be like us. There's no reason to stand out, no reason for you to have Brit Milah and Rosh Chodesh, Shabbat. There's no reason for you to do this and that. Of course, we know the Greeks did more than this. The Antiochus the third is the one who conquered Israel for the Greeks, and he was a rather benign leader. He was rather kind. But his son Antiochus the Fourth, he committed some massacres. He intentionally wanted to force Jews to worship their gods. The book of Maccabees talks about the famous story of Hannah and her 7 sons, where there was a lady by the name of Hannah, and this is sort of a prelude to something we're going to talk about later, and that's the how do you say this in polite company? The effects of the Jewish woman, and how really the Hanukkah holiday had a lot to do with our righteous matriarchs. But before we get to that, so Hannah is one of those people. This is not the same Hannah as in the Torah. Hannah in the Torah was barren, and then she was able to have one son, Shmuel. Another lady later on, in the time of Antiochus the Fourth. So there was a lady by the name of Hannah. The book of Maccabees records that she had 7 sons, and she was very righteous, famously righteous. And Antiochus was sure that he would be able to have her bow down to an idol. That was a thing they used to do back then, try to force Jews to bow down to idols. Such a thing, by the way, is not allowed in Judaism. Not only that, but it's one of the 3 things, 3.5 things. Okay, we call it the 3 things that we're supposed to give up our lives for. We're not supposed to do, even on pain of death. So those 3 things are
murder.
Yes, murder.
Adultery. Wait, did
adultery,
you say
or
half?
Yeah, there's another one.
Wait,
but,
where's the half?
Okay, so let's get the first 3. Let's get the 3 first. All right, so so we got 2 of the 3. So we got murder, we have immorality, and the other one is what is hara? Idol worship. Right. So where's the half? So I piqued your curiosity. So the half comes in with lashon hara, or also another way to say it is chilul Hashem. Anytime, so all of that's true. In other words, about the those 3 things, you're supposed to give up your life rather than do them. But if you're asked to do any other aveira in public, you're supposed to give up your life rather than do it. So all of those are, you're assuming all those 3 are in private. But Hannah and her 7 sons were basically asked to bow down to an idol, and her oldest son refused, the next son refused, all the way down to the youngest son. And then obviously Hannah's already in hysterics, and she's definitely not going to be bowing down to an idol. Antiochus thinks he's going to lose, and everybody around him thinks he's a fool. And so he's got this young kid, and he doesn't know what to do with him. So he's trying to rescue his own dignity at the same time, not kill this kid. And he's pretty sure the kid's not going to bow down to an idol either. So what does he do? He wrestles a ring off his fat finger. I'm assuming it's fat. He throws it on the ground, and he says, "Oh, little boy, could you pick up that ring for me?" And picking up the ring, the boy would be bowing down to pick up the ring, and the boy refuses, and so he is ultimately killed. And Antiochus the Fourth becomes this evil man, and I saw myself in Tzfat. There's a cave in the famous cemetery in Tzfat. There's a cave that on the outside it says that it's the burial place of Chana and her 7 sons. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but legends can be fun too sometimes. Okay, so
it's not true, Tati. I was in there.
it's you didn't see Chana and her 7 sons, but you don't know that they weren't buried there. All right, nice. Okay, but it does say that on the outside, right? Okay, so all right. So again, so that's what they're saying. Why stand out? You're not any different. You're the same as everybody else. So what's with the ox? Why an ox? Why an ox horn? Why can't it be anything else? They couldn't write it on they couldn't write it on like a placard. Didn't have to walk around with. Wouldn't that be more embarrassing? What if they had like a yellow badge on their arm where it says we don't have a part in God's Torah anymore? No, it's specifically on an ox's horn that the Jews had to write this. So the Arizal writes an interesting thing I'd like to share with you today. And this isn't so deep that I don't think we're going to be levitating when we learn this. So what does the ox represent? When you think of an ox, what do you think of? Right? You think of strength. It's a strong animal, right? It pulls a yoke, right? It pulls wagons, right? It's you got to make it move by poking it with an ox goad. Okay, so it's like shamger. So the so what's with the ox? It's a strong animal, and when you think of the ox, you want to like envision it. You want to like picture it in the shortest, easier way. You're playing Pictionary with somebody, and you want to draw a picture of an ox. What are you going to draw to represent an ox? I'll tell you what you're going to draw. Probably, if you want to win, you're going to draw a horn. Okay, because the horn represents the animal. You're going to draw a long, strong, thick horn. So it says the Arizal that an ox represents strength, and its horns are the body part that stand out the most. And what the Greeks were saying by having the Jews write this is that your relationship to God it isn't so strong. You're not as great as you think you are. Which, by the way, keep in mind, the Greeks thought that was basically a superiority complex that we had. That we were on some high horse or a high ox in this case, and that we thought we were so much better than everyone else. So they're saying, no, you're not. You're not an ox, and you're not the strength of a horn. Keep in mind also, as it says the Arizal, and this relates back to what we said before about the Arba Rosh Hashanah. Another thing that the horn represents is the shofar, right? Yes, you can't blow. You're not supposed to use an ox horn as the shofar. It's okay. I know that, but at least it looks like a horn, right? It definitely, if you cut it off, it's still a horn, and you could blow it for other purposes anyway. But it's not kosher for a shofar, but it looks like a shofar. And so the shofar blowing, so we're saying the Greeks were saying, shouldn't make you feel so different, as though you're different, as if we have different Rosh Hashanah. Only one Rosh Hashanah. We only have one New Year that we celebrate all together. January 1st, the Greeks would like that. January, isn't that funny? So January 1st, let's all get together. Let's get under the mistletoe and do what we do. Let's have a party. Let's watch the ball drop in New York City, and then have fireworks. Let's all celebrate Rosh Hashanah all the same. Let's not be different. Let's have one united giant Greek kingdom where we can all be one people together. So nobody can ever have the excuse of saying that's Greek to me. Everybody's Greek to me. Everybody's Greek. It's all Greek. It's like a sorority. All right. That's what they were saying. Don't be so different. Be the same. Don't have Rosh Chodesh. Don't have Brit Milah. Don't have Shabbat. And on your horns, for goodness sake, make it very clear that your horns aren't any different than Greek animal horns. right? Be normal. So it's very interesting, fascinating, really. Something that you might not have noticed before. That the victory over the Greeks was not complete. Right? If I'm sure you've learned this history before. The Hashmonaim defeated the Greeks, kicked out the Syrian Greeks for a time, but just a little while later, the Greeks came back, conquered the Hashmonaim, and created a very terrible kingdom led by Herod and others that was not very good for the Jews. So what do you mean? What are we celebrating for if it wasn't the victory? Because we didn't defeat them physically. We defeated them spiritually. It was a spiritual accomplishment of the Jewish people, and that's why we make such a big deal about the menorah. The Greeks had a spiritual goal. They wanted to say, you're not any better, you're not any different. And their spiritual goal had a lasting, lingering effect. So much so that we still feel it today. There are still, let's back up a bit. Part of the fight that the Hashmonaim had, as was hinted to in Ari Lesser's song in the beginning of the class, is the fact that they had to fight the Jews too. They didn't just fight the Yevanim, the Greeks. They fought what's called the Mityavnim, the people who became Greek, the Hellenized Jews, the call it assimilated Jews, the people who felt, yeah, Archimedes is pretty cool. Euclid's pretty smart. I like Alexander. He's a good leader. And Aristotle, he wrote such great works. Plato, it's wonderful. I love that analogy of the cave. Can't wait till I get out of it. And so people became Mityavnim, and then the Jews had to fight them. But they're still fighting them. We are still fighting them. We are still fighting us. We have a little bit of Mityavnim even in us. We still have a relic of this respect for Greek culture, deep in our understanding of things. When we read something in the Torah, for instance, we read something in the Torah, and the thought comes to our mind, as some people say sometimes when I'm giving a class, that doesn't make sense. Well, what do you mean it doesn't make sense? It's in the Torah. So if the Torah is true, is given by God, of course it makes sense. What do you mean it doesn't make sense? It doesn't make sense according to my understanding based on this linear logic that I learned in college, Logic 101, which is Greek. That doesn't make sense to you. Well, that's because you're still thinking Greek, which is not necessarily wrong. There's definitely a time and place for that, like if when you're doing, math equations. But there are places where Greek logic will not fit well, does not sit well with Talmudic logic, for instance, which is why the Rambam, the Maimonides, about 1,000 years ago, had to write the Moreh Nevuchim, had to write the Guide for the Perplexed. What was the goal of that entire book? And right now, our original Rabbi Korobkin, has a wonderful series on learning Moreh Nevuchim online at Web University, Web Yeshiva. I think it's called webyeshiva.com. Also available on Facebook. Wherever you can find it. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll hook you up. But a wonderful series where he goes through Moreh Nevuchim. And Moreh Nevuchim, the whole point of that book, the whole point of the Guide for the Perplexed, is that what the Rambam is doing is he's trying to fit Aristotelian logic into the Torah. Now, for the Rambam, it can make sense. The Rambam is brilliant, but for most of us normal people, it's very difficult. It needs some commentary, like Rabbi Korobkin, to make heads or tails of how Greek thought can fit with Jewish thought. There are different systems of thought, of art, of understanding things. Just take, for example, easy example, history, right? when the Greek historians began and wrote history books, how did they describe history? History is a line, right? It's a chronological order. It's a line. It goes from point A to point B, obviously beyond point B to point infinity, point C, wherever, right? We're not at the end of history, unless we are. But the Jewish concept of history is more like a gyre, is more of a spiral, right? Where or any point along a line in the spiral can have been repeated before. Every event, in a sense, sort of repeats itself. So I know it's a sort of a mind-blowing concept if you haven't heard this before, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. We even economists talk about things going in cycles, right? It's not just there was a depression and there was a recovery, and let's go on. It's when there's a depression or even a recession, and then there's a recovery. We can predict the recovery because history repeats itself. There's this commonality, and history repeats itself is an important concept in history because many wars and many conflicts have been avoided by people who realize how that works. That's probably a topic for another class, but just one example of how Judaism thinks of things differently than the Greeks. Now, you're going to ask me, wait, how do you know that Judaism says that history is this revolving cycle, that things repeat themselves? And the answer is Maseh Avot Siman Labanim. The actions of our forefathers were a foreshadowing of things to come. In other words, everything that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov went through, and we've mentioned some of these things in the Parsha class, right? The things that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov go through, they reverberate, and these events reoccur to their descendants later on. So that's called that's called cycle of history repeating itself in one way or another. Now, that doesn't mean you can predict what's going to happen instantly, obviously, but when you see things building up, you kind of know, when for instance, when you see a spike in anti-Semitism in a country, okay, you can know, if you know enough Jewish history, you know what that means. You can pretty much guess that things are going to get worse before they get better, and hopefully you can learn lessons from the past about how to deal with such things. All right, that's probably enough on that topic. Okay, again, the important thing here is though that the Greeks had a spiritual goal, and because they had a spiritual goal, it has a lingering effect. The Jews didn't really have a full victory. They never did, and until Mashiach comes, we might not ever. So one of the famous things about the Chanuka miracle, why do we celebrate it for 8 days? Because the Jews, when they reconquered the temple, and they wanted to make it useful again, make sacrifices there, beautify it. It had been defiled. It had been they sacrificed pigs on the altar. They had a statue of Zeus in the courtyard. So it was not quite as the Jewish environment as the Beit Hamikdash should be. Just like Lahavdil. It's not anybody's fault, but as nice as we try to make it outside, our green outdoor tent is never going to be the same as a shul. It's just not the same thing. So why did the Greeks? Oh, and one of the other things that the Greeks did, while they're defiling everything else, specifically seemed to have focused on the oil. They broke every jug, or defiled, whatever that means, every jug of oil that was there, all the pure oil that was used for the lighting of the 7-branched menorah in the Beit Hamikdash. And how did the menorah work in the Beit HaMikdash? So every morning, the Kohen would pour oil into the cups. They're all equally sized cups. He would pour oil and put an equally sized wick into each cup, and with this pure oil. When I say pure twice like that, I mean it's extra virgin olive oil. They would, which means it was squeezed from the olive, and it was squeezed again, and it was made. It was perfectly pure, no resin, no anything else inside. It was beautiful, clear olive oil, and you use that to pour into the menorah. And every night, the menorah would be continue to stay on until the morning, when all of the six of the branches, except for probably the middle branch, one of them would not go out miraculously, and the Kohen put oil and a new wick in there instead anyway, and lit it also, and then the same thing would continue every single night, every single day, every single night the menorah was lit, until the Greeks came over and stopped all that, and somehow ruined all of the oils. And then when the Hashmonaim came to the Beit HaMikdash, what did they find? Pach echad, one small jug of oil. I'm assuming it was small because it was enough for one day. So they lit all 7 candles, and they were very happy. That was the 25th of Kislev. That's what they celebrated. But wait, there's more. The next morning, when they came to check on the menorah, I don't know why they checked on it if they weren't going to light it because they didn't have any more oil. They looked, and guess what? All 7 branches were still lit. And the same thing for the next day, and the next day, all the way up to the 8 days it was lit, which is long enough for them to have manufactured more pure oil. And then they continued to light the menorah from then on until the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, about 150 years later or so. Question: why did the Greeks want to defile the oil specifically? So, as I just told you, the middle lamp, or one of the lamps, the Maharal writes it's the middle lamp, would remain lit every morning. And what does that show you? That shows you that it was not just a natural burning, it was a miraculous burning. There was a miracle going on. And what are miracles? Miracles are nothing else but the showing of Hashem's concern for what's going on in the world. And that's exactly what Chanuka is about, and exactly what the Greeks were against. They were all about how how we're the same, or there's no difference. If it's not logical, it doesn't make sense, then it's not true. Miracles don't make sense. The whole point of a miracle is that it's miraculous and it doesn't make sense. It's not logic. It's a nace. It stands out like a nace is supposed to. And that's the importance of the lighting of the menorah. We're showing that miracle happened, that God cares about us, and that there's this unique relationship amongst us. So the Greeks tried to ruin the oil so that the Jews wouldn't be able to light the menorah. They wouldn't be able to show the world that they have this unique relationship with Hashem. So the Rosh Chodesh and the Brit Milah and the Shabbat and the holes they made in the walls, all of those. And by the way, that's not just any wall that they made the holes in. That's that Sovev was the wall that the Gentiles were not able to pass through. Right, that's the wall that basically said it was the line in the sand that not very tall at all, 10 tefachim high. It basically said, don't pass through here if you're a Gentile. In other words, you could come to the Beit HaMikdash. Gentiles did, and you can bring an offering, and they did, but you can't go past this point because this is our unique relationship with Hashem. This is it. This is our intimate relationship. Just like a husband and wife have an intimate relationship that they don't share with anyone else in the world, so too the Jewish people and Hashem have this intimate relationship that can't be shared with anyone else, even if we wanted to. It can't be. Our other partner, Hashem, won't allow it. That's what it means that He chose us. Asher Bachar Banu. He chose us to give us the Torah for that purpose. So this lamp is so important to light. That's why in the Mishnah Torah, and Rambam writes in Hilchot Megillah v'Chanuka, Perek Daled Halacha Yud Bet, said mitzvah ner Chanukah mitzvah chaviva he ad meod v'tzarich adam lahazir ba kedei lehodia hanes. Doesn't usually write this kind of language. It's such an important mitzvah, he says. It's very, very precious. V'hodia hanes lahosiv b'shevach hakel v'hodia lo hanisim she'asa lanu. We have to praise, we have to glorify, we have to publicize this great miracle that so as many people can know as possible how great Hashem is to us. Afilu, he says, and this is where he gets very unique. He says, Afilu ein lo ma yochal, even if there's a person who doesn't have food to eat. Ella min hatzedakah shoel, he survives by asking from tzedakah, or morcher suto, he's supposed to ask for tzedakah or sell his coat. Blokeach shemen v'nerod v'madli. He's supposed to buy the oil, he's supposed to buy the wicks, he's supposed to light Hanukkah candles, because it's that important to do that. So why do we light for 8 days, though? The miracle really was 7 days. So there's by the way, books on this answer, or several hundred answers, according to some opinions. So the Maharal in Ner Mitzvah, and here we have the source here in the Chelek Bet over there. He has a whole book on Hanukkah called Ner Mitzvah. He talks about the history of the Greeks and how they were different. So he has he makes a whole to-do about the fact that the number 8 symbolizes something. The number 8 always symbolizes above nature, right? 7 is nature. There's 7 days in the week. And 8th is above nature. It's one beyond the possibility. I'm sure you've heard this before. It's an interesting concept he talks about with regard to a lot of things. But in terms of Hanukkah, again, we're talking about how it's miraculous. Again, we show that Hashem can do things beyond nature, and He only does that to show His unique relationship with us. When we light our Hanukkah candles, we regain that closeness to Hashem. So much so that the Haftarah that we read on Hanukkah comes from Zechariah, and one of the famous lines there is, Rani v'simchi bat Zion, ki hineni ba v'shachanti b'tocham ne'um Hashem. Hashem is going to live amongst us. It's Shechina, Hashem's presence. It's going to be within our homes. And that's a very important part of Hanukkah that I'd like to actually speak about in just a few moments regarding what I'd like to do for our Hanukkah event this year. A lot of people think that Hanukkah is about, being extravagant, being out there, lighting the biggest menorah you can in the biggest, most public possible place. That's not what Hanukkah is. Hanukkah is about v'shachanti b'tocham. Hashem is going to dwell within us, within our homes. Hanukkah is actually the best holiday for quarantine. It doesn't sound like a nice thing to think about, but maybe it does. Think about it. Hanukkah is an internal holiday. It's our relationship with Hashem. We're lighting candles in the window for other people outside to see. That's true. If they're walking outside in a mask, that's great. They'll see it. But the lights are indoors. The lights are in our homes, on our table, perhaps, wherever it is. We're signifying the fact that we're publicizing the fact that Hashem has this unique relationship with us and our families. Okay, and with that, I'd like to end the class. See if there's any questions. Oops, not that. But also.